The year was 1741. The place, Enfield, Massachusetts, right in the heart of Puritan New England. You know those Puritans. Stodgy, belts on their hats, the ones. Jonathan Edwards delivers a stern and a powerful sermon filled with hellfire and God's wrath. And the stoic and reserved Puritans in the audience appropriately responded with crying? With swooning? Exclamations heard a quarter-mile away? What? Alright, so maybe the Puritans weren't so stoic and reserved after all. Let's face it, they weren't even really Puritan anymore. A century after their forefathers had landed at Plymouth, they'd loosened up, and let's be honest, some of them ended up, losing their religion. Sorry. Revivals became a big thing. Edward's hometown saw a little awakening in the mid-1730s, and a great awakening kicked off shortly thereafter as George Whitefield came with calls for renewal and repentance. So, should we see Edwards in the vein then of some fiery evangelist warning the world it was going to hell in a handbasket and riding the emotional roller coasters all the way to historical significance? Not so fast. Religious studies professor Douglas Winarowski paints a more nuanced view of Edwards, where, yes, he participates in the revivalism of his time, but at the same time he has the self-awareness, the intellectual rigor, the spiritual consistency to avoid many of the sensationalist pitfalls. So what about that sermon? Well, local revival meetings started up, where Edwards saw some pretty fiery preaching and decided to try his hand at it. The God that holds you over the pit of hell, much in the same way as one holds a spider or some loathsome insect, abhors you and is dreadfully provoked. Yikes. But all the vivid imagery does have a point about the desperate state of the unconverted listeners, and it reminds them that now you have an extraordinary opportunity, a day wherein Christ has thrown wide open the door of mercy and stands calling and crying with a loud voice to poor sinners. The powerful, emotional impact of these words, with the swooning, with the crying out so frequently that Edwards had to pause to restore order, resulted in over 90 converts. But how could a simple sermon have such a big impact? Well, Dr. Stephen Truly notes that the scholarly consensus is on the powerful imagery drawn from biblical texts, and he further credits the ritual of the sermon, the rise and fall of exposing judgment, and the covering mercy, creating a powerful emotional experience. But is that all? Well, for some, it might have been. Winarowski details how Edwards dealt with false conversions, scandalous affairs within the church. These new light preachers had brought about radical conversions throughout New England, but then there was some hanky-panky among these new converts that would force Edwards to write a treatise on religious affections where he endeavors to clearly discern wherein true religion does consist, so that he can separate the fake converts from the true church. So what do we make of Edwards? Was he an enthusiast, stirring up the crowds, or was he an intellectual who made a brief foray into the popular appeal realm and regretted it? Well, in reviewing recent scholarly literature on the subject, Bryan Bademan describes Edwards' lasting influence on two different camps of modern Christians. Some, like pastor and writer John Piper, see him as a hero of Reformed theology for his serious works, while others, like charismatic Guy Chervaux, see him as a model of devotional life. Perhaps Professor David Kling summarized Edwards best as a man who was stoked by the fires of revival, but was unimpressed by testimonies without actions. In Kling's own words, Edwards refused to see true revival as a matter of experience divorced from the everyday expressions of love. So, maybe this last great Puritan really did just seek a pure religion. Not watered down, but not tainted either.